Hi, today we are talking about power, politics, gender-based violence, and the future with Tanya Selvaratnam. Tanya is a producer, a writer, an artist, an award-winning filmmaker, and the author most recently of a new book called Assume Nothing, A Story of Intimate Violence. In it, she writes about her relationship with then State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman of New York State, and her experiences of emotional and physical abuse. We'll talk to her specifically about it. And we're having a larger conversation about some of the issues related to power structures and violence at a time that couldn't be more pressing, with the accusations that stand against New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and the emerging Reclaim These Streets movement in England. I am going to bring in Tanya. Stand by. Here we go. So before we begin, she's invited in. I have a disclaimer to make, which is I've known Tanya since college. Hi!
Hi, Jessica.
We've known each other since college, but I'm not going to say how long ago that was. Is that okay?
It's totally okay.
Great. Good to see you. Congrats on the book release. I remember speaking to you when you were just about to start writing it. Would you tell us a little bit about what is the message in the book and what do you want readers to come away understanding?
Well, I wrote the book about my experience with the former Attorney General of New York State, Eric Schneiderman, which was exposed in an investigative piece by Jane Mayer and Ronan Farrow of The New Yorker and resulted in his swift resignation within a few hours. And I wrote the book to write my way out of the darkness. And also because I had so many people reaching out to me with their own stories of intimate violence. And so I wrote this book for them, and also to help others spot, stop, and prevent intimate partner violence in their own lives. It's not just my story, it's one that's shared by so many millions of people. And I wanted to take the reader from my journey of victim to survivor to thriver, and hoping that it helps others find their light too.
Mm-hmm. You've written that intimate partner violence is some of the most difficult violence to write about. Can you speak to why that is?
It's embarrassing, it's shameful, it's painful. The micro details are humiliating, but I also feel that the more people who've experienced intimate partner violence who speak about it, the more we can take the stigma and shame out of it, because the stigma comes from secrecy. And I've said that I feel we are at the next wave of the Me Too movement, which is about intimate violence in committed relationships. One of the reasons it's so hard to talk about is that there are typically only two witnesses, the victim and the abuser. But in my story, it was clear that I was one of many in a pattern of abusive relationships with Eric Schneiderman.
I want to get back to your thesis about the next phase of the Me Too movement, but let's broaden the conversation for a moment, because you are speaking about this at an incredibly pressing moment, just as Andrew Cuomo, another prominent New York politician, is facing these accusations of harassment and even assault, and there's pressure for him to go. And I wonder if, as you were debating whether to speak about Eric Schneiderman, who was then the Attorney General and seen as an advocate for feminists and for women's rights, was there ever pressure on you not to reveal your experience to protect him as a policymaker?
There was a lot of pressure. I had many people, close friends, acquaintances, colleagues who were questioning my decision to come forward, but they were far outweighed by people who told me that I knew I was doing the right thing. I didn't feel really like I had a decision to make when I discovered that I was part of a pattern, which happened in a very unexpected way, which is that a friend, Jennifer Gonerman, identified a previous girlfriend with an eerily similar experience within 24 hours of me retrieving all of my things from Eric Schneiderman's place after he and I had parted ways. So then it became more a question of conscience than courage. And I felt that I really didn't have a choice, because there's no justification for having the Attorney General of New York State be someone who, despite the fact that he championed women publicly and was a key ally of the Me Too movement at that time, abuse women privately and get away with it.
Now, and I hear what you're saying. You've made a slightly different distinction, it sounds like, with Governor Cuomo. You have been quoted saying that, let me find your quote, my reaction is that there needs to be an independent investigation before jumping to conclusions. I believe in due process and is establishing the veracity of the allegations and the credibility of the accusers. Why not call for his resignation right now, like so many elected officials have done?
I've been very disappointed in the way the media has covered it and the way people are jumping to conclusions. In my case, it was important for my credibility to be established and for the veracity of my allegations to be established. You know, I participated in the journalistic process, which was vetted by multiple lawyers at the New Yorker. And also I participated in subsequent legal investigations, multiple legal investigations. It was uncomfortable to participate in them, but I felt it was important, because if we don't have due process, then we don't have fairness. And I believe that due process is vital to fairness. So that's why I made that particular statement. And hopefully the investigation will be carried out in a thorough and rigorous way. And once, depending on what the facts show, appropriate action should be taken. And I will say that I'm very grateful that the Attorney General in charge of that investigation is Letitia James and not Eric Schneiderman. Because if it had been Eric Schneiderman, it would have been an inherently compromised investigation, because Governor Cuomo knew about Eric's violent behavior towards women years before I dated Eric.
How do you know that?
I know that because he was aware of a previous girlfriend. Multiple people were.
So you're raising something that's fascinating, because if, you know, one of the dilemmas that people were raising for you is that, well, if you push out Schneiderman, who knows who replaces him, and this could be in a far worse place. But instead, several years later, you have Letitia James in that role. So I wonder if this conversation, as we think about these issues, needs to be slightly more nuanced than the way it's taking place right now.
For sure. There's this myth of indispensability that we build around people who are doing the right things publicly, even if they behave badly privately. And that was certainly the situation with Eric Schneiderman, because he was seen as a progressive advocate, as a key ally, not just of women, but of vulnerable communities. But I believe that there is somebody better who will take the place of a powerful person if that person is indeed an abuser or harms people. And by, within the next day, Barbara Underwood had been named as the interim attorney general, and then in the subsequent election, Letitia James was elected. What that highlights for me is that rather than building these cults of personality around powerful people, rich people, talented people, and enabling them, and many of those enablers are women, we really need to be looking at expanding the conduit programs so that there are many people who can rise to the top and who can rise with each other. And that's why I love all the women's leadership training programs that have emerged over the last few years. It's exciting.
You've raised a lot there. I want to unpack it. First, you've said that you want this investigation to unfold for Cuomo. So it sounds to me like you're allowing for the possibility that there is an outcome in which he could stay in office.
It is not for me to say what the outcome should be or what I think the outcome might be, but I trust in Letitia James to oversee a fair investigation. And again, depending on what the investigation shows, what the facts show, appropriate action should be taken. It might result in his resignation, but I feel that right now, one of the reasons I've been disappointed in the media coverage of it is it's been this drip, drip, drip of isolated stories that just allow him to keep digging in his heels, because few of them meet the bar of legal action. And that is me having gone through multiple legal investigations myself. But what is emerging is what it highlights about this power over culture that you and I have talked about, which is the diminishing of a woman's worth in the workplace, and creating hostile environments for women to rise up. The other thing that's important about the Cuomo investigation is that, I do hope that the media does take more responsibility and does do a deeper dive. Just in the last few days, we have seen pieces by Rebecca Traister and in New York Magazine and Michael Schneerson in Vanity Fair. And when I read those pieces, I was like, yes, finally, thank goodness. The journalists are doing this work to really look at a whole pattern.
That's what I want to just explain that to the audience that might not be as familiar with how journalism works, which is you're drawing a distinction between these sort of first person exclamations where people just say what they make the allegations, but it's out of a larger context versus a more reported piece, which is more valuable. Why?
So I can use my own situation as an example. When I first spoke with David Remnick, I had written a first-person account of what I had experienced. It was about 15 pages. And because I trusted David Remnick, and he told me that it would be much better for my story and for the issue at large if I were to participate in an investigation to establish a pattern. Because for me, it wasn't about myself. It was about exposing this hypocrisy and also of preventing him from harming other women, of warning other women. So that is why, I chose not to go forward with a first person narrative. It wasn't about, me having that spotlight. It's an uncomfortable spotlight, but it was more about what is going to serve the larger cause. And the larger cause is to expose the hypocrisy, to warn other people, and to hopefully change the culture.
Let's talk about that. One of the attorney for one of Cuomo's accusers said, stand by, Charlotte Bennett, she accuses Cuomo of harassment, and her attorney said in a statement today that the investigation should focus on Cuomo's actions and the broader culture of, quote, fear, abuse, and secrecy, close quote, that the senior staff cultivated. Would you speak to that and how you think this conversation should evolve and what the investigation should include?
Well, I also feel that the next wave of Me Too is about exposing the enablers, because many of these abusers don't get away with their behavior unless they have an enabler behind them. And sadly, many of these enablers are women. And what has been exposed in these pieces that Michael Schneerson and also Rebecca Traister have written is that there is a whole culture around Cuomo that has allowed his alleged behavior to be perpetuated. And, what I've said is Cuomo is the fruit, not the root of this behavior. It is a conditioning that we are forced to accept from the time we are born. And that conditioning is facilitated by the patriarchy that encourages men to dominate and women to be silent.
What is a power over culture, and what would you like to see it changed into? Well, go for a moment, please.
Yes. Well, I distinguish between power over culture, and this was in a conversation with a friend where I was trying to unpack what is happening around my story and around these other stories such as Cuomo. And power over culture is a culture that operates in a place of scarcity, where we're encouraged to be in competition with each other, to power over each other. It's about the acquisition of material objects and also of material power. A true power culture is one where we are allowed to be our best selves and we rise together. And I feel like Stacey Abrams is a great example of true power culture. Build from the ground up and rise together. Because so much of the power over culture, the reason why it is perpetuated by female enablers, the female patriarchy, is that they benefit from that power over culture. These abusers they're conduits to power, and we have to change that. I don't know if you've seen the Allen v. Farrow docuseries.
Explain to folks who haven't. Yeah, it's the Woody Allen docuseries. Yeah.
So the final episode was last night. I watched it with great trepidation because I knew it would be upsetting, but I also knew it was important for me to watch. And I feel overwhelmed by the convergence of my book coming out concurrently with the Cuomo allegations and also the release of Alan v. Farrow. Because on a personal note, Woody Allen was one of Eric Schneiderman's favorite filmmakers. And I would remember cringing when he would want to watch them, because I had stopped watching Woody Allen's movies when he started dating his girlfriend's adopted daughter,
Me
Cindy
too.
Irvin. And this is where the myth of indispensability comes in. It's like, do we really think that there's no greater filmmaker that can replace him? And one of the things that's disturbing in that is to see how so many of these actresses that worked with him stood by him and even went out of their way to defend him. I have to say, I lost a lot of respect for Diane Wiest and Diane Keaton after watching that movie. It was very sad for me. But what Alan v. Farrow really highlights is how much this ecosystem has been facilitated by all these tentacles, the agents, the publicists, the lawyers, and even those in government who allow this power over culture to continue.
So how do we interrupt that? Because you've talked about this is the new phase of Me Too. And part of unpacking Me Too, one piece of it is speaking about intimate partner violence, but the other is revealing the power structures that enable this kind of abuse to continue. And one of the challenges I think that women have is calling out the women who participate, because then you can be accused of being anti-woman or taking on women in power or being threatened or a million things that make the people who speak about it more vulnerable and allow the women in power to sort of surround themselves and become even more valuable in their positions. How do we engage this conversation without, while being safe?
Well, I believe it's not about the shiny objects. It's not about taking down one person at a time. It's not even about calling out the individuals. It's about looking at the whole infrastructure that has allowed for this. Because again, like with Cuomo and with Eric Schneiderman, they are the fruits, not the roots of this conditioning. And we have to look at the way that we condition the way that children are raised. It's about healthy manhood programs. It's about female empowerment programs. It's about overhauling education. It's about having more laws that protect victims and survivors, and also having governmental support for organizations that provide the legal services and counseling and shelter for victims and survivors. And I think that, I don't want to say that I have sympathy for the enablers, but I think that they've been brainwashed, these cults of personality that they have bought into. And it's almost like they need to be unbrainwashed. And I think that those who are in power are not going to cede power. We see that time and time again. How people choose loyalty over conscience, how they vote against their own self-interests, how white women vote against their own self-interests. And there's that amazing line have you seen Heidi Schreck's What the Constitution Means to Me?
No. Oh, yes.
So Heidi has this amazing section, and I went to see her show while I was writing my book. So there's like a whole chapter.
I saw it right before COVID. I don't think anyone can see it now, can they?
No. Well, they can see it actually on Amazon.
Okay, it's online?
It is online. I highly recommend it. It is so much. I was not prepared for how much that play was not just about the Constitution, but about the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And about violence against women.
Yeah.
And Heidi has this amazing line, when will white women stop betraying women? And I think it's important, as with all groups, not to see them as a monolith. But when you look at the voting records and actions of white women with regard to policy, it's clear that there is kind of an internalized misogynism and patriarchy that is going on. So I believe that since those in power aren't likely to cede power easily, that what we have to do is build our power together stronger so that we subsume them.
I love it. And approach it almost with a generosity of spirit.
Exactly.
And as corny as this sounds, love and compassion.
Love and kindness and grace.
Grace, such a good word. Let me go back to something, because you have the words for this, and I am constantly asked this. This is one of the things that my audience asks me all the time in DMs. Going back to the Cuomo example. While some women's rights advocates that say Cuomo has dragged his feet on legislation or undermined women's rights leaders, he has advanced issues like signed into law legislation that includes bills that extend the statute of limitations on rape charges, signed a law allowing for paid family leave. He's advanced pay equity legislation and, ironically, new workplace harassment protections. In theory, you know, he's up for re-election in 2022. There's no term limits. He could run again. As an incumbent, he would be hard to defeat in theory. But with that, that's the political argument. This is the argument I'm given. And if it's an open seat, that means that a Republican or somebody less sympathetic to women's issues could have a better shot at getting that seat. Why should Democrats replace somebody who is going to advocate for women's issues? And how do you weigh these competing objectives? The value of having a person who doesn't harass women in office versus taking the risk of seeing your agenda set back?
For me, there's no decision. In my case, Eric Schneiderman co-authored strangulation legislation when he was strangling and choking his intimate partners in private. And I feel with a lot of these abusers who are considered progressive, who are considered advocates of equality and of women, they might take public actions that support that, but their private actions are important too. And we also have to recognize that sometimes their public actions is a way to preserve their power. And also their public actions are a way to deflect from their private behaviors. And so much of why this power over culture is so insidious is that people in power think they can get away with harmful behavior because they don't think anyone's looking, and because they don't think anyone's going to talk about it, because they are in power. And so rather than like operating from a place of fear, you know, I have you read The Gift of Fear by Gavin Becker?
Yeah.
Oh, it is so good. So it's a book that I read. My dear friend Amy Richards told me, you have to read this book when I was dealing with my decision whether or not to come forward about Eric Schneiderman. And in The Gift of Fear, Gavin de Becker talks about the difference between good fear and bad fear. Good fear is fear that helps us look to our intuition and live our best lives. Bad fear is that which prevents us from living our best lives. If you apply that to this argument about keeping men in power, even if their private actions are reprehensible, I say good fear will tell you that there will be somebody better to replace them who is not harmful in private. That was proven in my case with Letitia James. I am sure that if the facts prove that Cuomo is indeed guilty of these allegations, there is definitely somebody better to replace him as governor. And we have to start thinking about who that might be now.
Are you running for office?
No way. I do not believe in running for office. Not for me, but there are so many amazing, amazing candidates out there.
Have you suffered for having told your story?
The hard part was 3 years ago when I first started speaking with Jane Mayer, which was actually on March 20th, my birthday of 2018. So we're coming up on the anniversary of that. That was the hard part because I didn't know how the story would land, and I was scared. I know many people who've dated or been entangled with powerful men and live still today in mortal fear of them. So if the story had not landed well, I had made plans for my personal safety to leave the country. I deleted my social media accounts. I went and stayed with a friend for a while so that I was safe in a cocoon, not in my apartment. Right now, I feel that by writing the book, I have come out as my strongest self ever. I'm not afraid. I have my moments of dealing with the PTSD. It's been happening a lot lately since the book came out recently, because I've had so many people reaching out to me, sharing their stories of intimate violence. And every time I hear from somebody, it just makes me sad that there are so many people who have these memories. And we really have to chip away at the patriarchy that allows for the cycle of violence to continue.
Do you have advice for people who are struggling with sharing their story?
Know that you're not alone and you're not crazy, and that there is a whole community of people who share your experience. While abuse is common, every victim is unique, and we have to honor the uniqueness of each victim's story. On that note, I think it's very important that if people are in abusive relationships at the moment, my advice would be tell someone you trust not to tell anyone else what you're going through. Write down for yourself every bit of pain you've experienced. I did that for myself. Reach out to a professional who will know what to do. Like in my case, I had a friend who asked me, knowing that things were rocky, after we had a series of questions and answers, she finally got to a question that blew my mind. She said, "Does he hit you?" And those 4 words changed everything. She knew that she was not equipped to continue the conversation with me after I answered yes, because I wasn't going to lie to her, but she put me in touch with a domestic violence expert. And one of the aspects of the book I'm most proud of is that I felt it was very important to have resources that people could refer to. And the resources are for very different communities. So resources for Indigenous communities, for communities with disabilities, for LGBTQAI plus communities, for teenagers dealing with dating violence, and Black community, Latinx community. So all those resources are in the book, and people should reach out to those organizations and for those who know loved ones who are in abusive relationships, to reach out to them, and you could be their lifeline. And don't be judgmental, don't be confrontational, be patient, be a good listener, ask questions that might elicit answers, because you never know when your loved one will be ready to talk. And that was the situation for me.
It's great to see you like this. It's really great. I want to ask you we talked about the personal, we talked about the political, let's talk about the practical. What is the next phase of the Me Too movement, and what's your call to action? What would you like to see women and allies do?
Well, first of all, to support each other, and to really focus. I mean, what was beautiful about the pandemic, for all its tragedies, was to see how people came together to help each other. And also to see the descendancy of celebrity culture and the ascendancy of everyday people culture. And I hope that that sticks, because that was a really beautiful, unexpected impact of the pandemic. The other thing that the pandemic highlighted was the alarming increase in domestic violence cases. Vice President Harris wrote an incredible opinion piece for the Washington Post about how the pandemic has resulted in a mass exodus of women from the workforce, and it's a national emergency that requires national solutions. I feel the domestic violence crisis is also a national emergency, and it's intertwined with this mass exodus of women from the workforce, because when you disempower women economically, you make them more susceptible to abuse. So the call to action is for organizations to receive more support from government, for government to take a good look at the laws. I am really, really hopeful that there is now a White House Gender Policy Council, and I'm really looking forward to what Jen Klein and Julissa Reynoso do. There is so much work to be done, and now we have an opportunity. So let's take that opportunity. Like what Arundhati Roy, the amazing writer, said, the pandemic is a portal. It has exposed so much inequity. It has exposed so many fractures within our systems. Let's figure out solutions. And the solutions are tangible. They're so tangible when it comes to intimate partner violence. The solutions involve education and public awareness. It involves a narrative shift, the type of stories that are out there around gender justice, being more responsible.
Can you explain what kinds of stories need to shift on gender justice?
Well, to show how common abuse is, and to have more responsibility in representing these stories in the media. That's both from a journalistic perspective and also from a popular culture perspective. This, even with all the talk around gender justice and racial justice, last summer, two of the most streamed movies were The Help and 365 Days. That doesn't just...
365 Days. I don't remember what that was.
Oh, it's a totally misogynist, like, sexcapade
rom-com. Okay.
Okay. That was on Netflix. And those don't happen by coincidence. That's because there's a lot of muscle, economic muscle and power muscle that's put behind promoting those types of products. So it's like really questioning, and there have been some amazing audits done about how corporations actually function for all the public facing change that corporations are making. You know, we're going to support Black Lives Matter. We're making all these platitude statements. What is actually happening on the inside with regard to the makeup of who's at the decision-making tables? So I think we need more people at the decision-making tables who believe in fairness and justice and equity. And we have to stop the lip service. So it's about narrative change. It's about education change, sex education change. We need to overhaul porn. I mean, there's so much. There's so much. There's so much.
Go into it. Let's talk about that next. I'm into that. I think it's even happening in globally right now. We're seeing it in London in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder. There's a Reclaim the Streets movement where women and advocates are talking about centering male violence rather than putting the onus on women to keep ourselves safe. So we're seeing that shift globally, or the demand for a change.
Yes, and you and I were talking earlier about Naomi Alderman's book, The Power, which is about how it's this incredible dystopian science fiction book that really rocked my world when I was working on my book and actually helped me with my decision to come forward. And it's about how women discover that they have hidden physical abilities, and they start rising up all over the world, in Saudi Arabia, in India, and in the United States. And other countries all around the world. And I feel like we are starting to see it. I feel like the dam is breaking. Women are saying enough is enough. It is not okay. You can't tell us to be silent. You can't tell us to hide. And out of the tragedy of the Sarah Everard story, I hope that the women in the UK keep speaking out and keep saying, don't tell us to stay home so we are invisible. We are going to be out there. We are going to be loud. We're going to be bold, because you're the one who needs to change. The law enforcement needs to change. And what's happening in Mexico right now with that horrific president who is endorsing a sex offender narco to be in government office. And the women have taken to the streets in Mexico too. So, I mean, one of the things I say is, like, I'm tired of women having to overcome. I'm tired of women having to be resilient. Women need a break. So we also have to remember how to support each other and find moments of joy and community, because, boy, it is going to be a lot of hard work ahead to get people to change.
The work never stops. Tell people where they can find your book and where they can find you.
So the book is called Assume Nothing. It came out from Harper Books very recently. This is a copy of the book. Yay. Please get it. Yay! And it is being turned into a series, I should mention, by ABC Signature Disney Television. So that's very exciting, with Joanna Coles executive producing. So I'm really excited about that, because it means that the message will reach a larger audience and hopefully, permeate popular culture, which is what I want. As for where they can find me, I'm very easy to find, TanyaTurnsUp.com.
TanyaTurnsUp.com. And here on Instagram?
At Tanya Author. I'm at Tanya Author on all platforms.
Okay. And I'll post all that so people know where to go to get it. Tanya, thank you. I'd love to have another conversation again on any one of these topics.
Jessica, I'm so glad to have this conversation with you. I was looking forward to it all day. I'm so excited.
It's great to see you. Congrats.
You too, because I think the last time we saw each other in person was at a restaurant in Venice.
I know, like 2 years ago. But hopefully you'll be out here when you're doing a TV show.
Definitely. And I just got vaccinated. So
you can fly soon.
I'm fully vaccinated. I never thought that I would be happy to have 2 types of cancer, but it came in handy right now.
Whatever it takes these days, right?
Oh, so anyway, yes, I do. I hope to be flying out soon, because I grew up in California.
I know. Well, hopefully we'll all be traveling soon. Congrats. We'll keep following you. I'll let everybody know where to buy and find you. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jessica. Bye.
Bye.